Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Billy Napier, the Florida Gators, wrapped up their spring game on Saturday afternoon, and now you got the transfer portal opening up on Tuesday morning. I want to take a deep dive into this Florida Gators roster and talk about a few positions that we could expect Florida and Billy Napier to go after in the transfer portal. Now, you look back at that spring game, we recapped it Saturday afternoon. I thought you got a lot of answers from this Florida Gators program, but there's also some positions that I think we all agree on could probably benefit from some more talent being added in this spring portal window. Want to get into some of those positions. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. A shout out to the Florida Gator fans. Whether we're breaking down the spring game, talking recruiting, you guys continue to show a ton of love, a ton of support to the boys. Cannot tell you guys how much that means to the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I kind of want to just go right through this depth chart, talk about positions that we could see Florida go after. You look at the quarterback spot, and Florida is in a great spot where there are a lot of other Power 5 programs that are trying to figure out their quarterback position, not only in 2024, but what the future looks like. If you're Florida and you got Graham Mertz, a quarterback you have a ton of confidence in heading into 2024, and then you have DJ Lagway taking over after. And from what we saw during the spring game from DJ Lagway, he's made up of the right stuff. Not only super talented from a physical trait standpoint, but a guy that just seems to be a young man, if you will, that you want leading this Florida Gators roster and this Florida Gators program. I think Florida is in a really good spot at the quarterback position now. You look at that running back room, and this was a running back room that I said, hey, maybe you go to the portal and add a veteran running back heading into 2024. I come out of the spring game saying, I take that back. I think you're good at this running back spot. Obviously, you know what you have with Montrell Johnson. I thought Trayon Webb ran the football pretty solid, but I think the story was, Daniels and Jaden Baugh showed that I think they can be reliable running backs for this Florida Gators program as true freshmen. You got 4 or 5 running backs in that running back room that I looked at that spring game on Saturday afternoon and said, yeah, I have a lot of confidence that those guys can tote the rock for this Florida Gators program heading into 2024. I don't think you have a question mark at that running back spot. Now, the position that's probably getting the most buzz in terms of Florida adding into the transfer portal is at the wide receiver room. And going back and watching the spring game again, kind of reading some of the spring practice notes, I probably do agree with that, right? You look at a guy like Eugene Wilson, who is truly a difference maker. They let him be more of an X factor in that game as well. I think one of our big conversations was about Eugene Wilson is, as a true freshman, I felt like they treated Eugene Wilson as kind of a gadget guy as opposed to a true wide receiver one. They were letting him cook downfield. He was creating separation. Eugene Wilson is by far the wide receiver one on this team, and I think one of the best wide receivers not only in the SEC, but in the country. But a lot of Florida Gator fans are sitting there and saying, all right, do we have any other difference makers at this wide receiver position outside of Eugene Wilson? And I'm not really sure about that answer, right? I thought you saw some really good things from a guy like Aiden Mizell. I thought you saw some solid things from a guy like Khalil Jackson. Obviously, Andy Jean battling injury, did not get to see him. You look at this Florida Gators wide receiver room, we say, all right, Eugene Wilson is an absolute guy. Who's the other real difference maker in this wide receiver room? I don't know if Florida has one, right? Tremere Dike, solid. Khalil Jackson, solid. Andy Jean, Aiden Mizell, young guys that aren't proven, but we're kind of optimistic about them. I could see Florida going out in the transfer portal and say, hey, we want to go get one more difference maker in this pass catching room to go with Eugene Wilson. And my opinion on that is you probably should be looking at more of a possession wide receiver, a bigger bodied wide receiver that can work downfield. You look at how this Florida Gators wide receiver room is kind of put together. It's speed, right? Eugene Wilson, Aiden Mizell, Jere Hawkins as a true freshman. There are a lot of guys that are burners in this wide receiver room. How many guys are those bigger bodies that can work down the field? I think Tremere Dike could be that guy. But if you're Billy Napier, you could probably say, hey, we want to go get one more name in that wide receiver room. Now, another position that I sneaky going back and watching Florida spring game again this morning and say, I think they could add another difference maker in this position room, and that's the tight end room, right? Arliss Boardingham, you guys know how I feel about him. I think he is an absolute dude. But the reason why I say that is not necessarily a shot at a guy like Hayden Hansen, but I don't know if he's a difference maker for this Florida Gators program. You look at what they want to do on offense. They were primarily working out of 12 personnel on Saturday during that spring game. Florida wants to operate with 2 tight ends. And you look at this Florida Gators offense, I think it would mean a ton if they got another difference maker at that tight end position that really could provide some juice in the passing attack. I think Arliss Boardingham is certainly that guy, but Hayden Hansen, not really a guy that really makes you fear what he can do down the field. You look at Florida and how they can get this passing attack a little bit more juice. You look at programs like Georgia or like Michigan, they run their passing attacks through the tight end position. I think Florida could add another really, really good tight end and say, hey, we got some difference makers in this pass catching unit. And yeah, we have some solid wide receivers, but we got some really dangerous tight ends. And again, you look at how much 12 personnel the Florida Gators want to play. Go get some difference makers at that tight end position. I think that would mean a ton for this Florida Gators offense. Now, the last position on the offensive side of the football that I think Billy Napier in Florida handled this well, where they went out and got their tackles in the winter portal window, and Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon and Devin Manuel. You have Austin Barber, who wasn't healthy for the spring game. You feel good about the tackle spot. If there are good offensive linemen that pop into the transfer portal, I expect Billy Napier to go and pursue them, because you look at Florida and what their biggest kind of what held them back in 2023, it really started with line of scrimmage play on the offensive side of the football. So if you get an opportunity, in my mind, to make the offensive line better, even if you feel pretty good about your offensive line, you're going to try to do that, right? A healthy, deep offensive line is always a good thing going into the SEC. I don't think it's a glaring need like it was during December before Florida landed these tackles, but it's certainly something that you still want to try to get better. And so we'll see what names hit the portal at that offensive line position. I could certainly see Florida trying to add one more body on the offensive line. Now, you go to the defensive side of the football, and the first thing that we noted after this spring game is this team on defense is significantly deeper than it was the last 2 years with Billy Napier, especially on the defensive line. You're starting to see guys kind of emerge, TJ Searcy, Cameron James, as guys that you can really rely on the line of scrimmage. Now, looking at that front seven, where I think Florida could add a name is not necessarily depth. I feel pretty good about where Florida is from a depth standpoint on the defensive line. I'm looking for maybe an elite edge rusher if one does indeed hit the transfer portal. You look at what they had with Princely U last year. I mean, that true alpha rushing the passer. When you look at Florida this year, I mean, I think Tyreek Sapp is extremely solid. I'm extremely excited about guys like TJ Searcy, Cameron James, obviously Kelby Collins, LJ McCray. The way I look at it, though, is if there's one thing they're missing on that defensive line, it's that elite edge rusher that can really get after the passer. And I'm not saying that can't be TJ Searcy or Cameron James or even true freshman LJ McCray, but as it sits right now, we don't really know who that guy is. So if there is an elite edge rusher that enters the transfer portal and is a proven production kind of guy at the Power 5 level, I could see Florida going there. But on this defensive line, there's not a ton of defensive linemen that are going to be in the portal that make this roster better, because I think they're already in a really good spot on the defensive line. You look at the linebacker spot, Pup Howard, I thought played some really good football on Saturday afternoon during the spring game. You look at the back end, I like what Florida has. I think you're getting some really good production, obviously, from guys like Bryce Thornton and Jordan Castell coming back. I thought Jakeem Jackson looked really good at that cornerback spot. Jason Marshall as well. This is a talented group that I think has a higher ceiling than I think a lot of people like to recognize. You talk about Jason Marshall, NFL caliber guy. Jakeem Jackson going into a second year, NFL caliber guy. Bryce Thornton, Jordan Castell, super young safeties, but we know they have extremely high ceilings in terms of what they can be. And then you add some depth in guys like DJ Douglas. I thought Asa Turner played really well. Triquez Bridges, maybe not so much. I look at the secondary and said they did most of their work that they needed to do, getting those veteran guys in the winter months. So I look at this Florida Gators team going into the spring portal window, and I don't think they need to be desperate at many positions. I think you could certainly see them go grab just one more wide receiver to add a little bit more juice to this pass catching unit. I would love to see them add a tight end for, again, how much 12 personnel they play. I think they could really benefit from another tight end. Outside of that, you look at this Florida Gators roster, I think you feel pretty good. Would love to hear some of your guys' opinions in the comment section. Again, I learned a ton from you guys. You guys kind of gave me the idea about that wide receiver room. Appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.